Nigeria has been ranked as the third most expensive country in Africa for air travel. This is according to a new report by the African Airlines Association. On average, passengers pay about $180 in taxes and charges per international or regional ticket, nearly 3 times the African average, which is $68, and higher than fares to some parts of Europe. Only Gabon and Sierra Leone recorded higher charges. Aviation experts have attributed the steep cost to a mix of excessive taxes, multiple regulatory fees, foreign exchange challenges, and the lack of a competitive national carrier. The findings come as policymakers and industry stakeholders debate how to improve affordability, ease of travel, and Nigeria's standing as a regional hub. Joining me for more on this, I have Mendis, Aviation Consultant. Thank you so much for joining me today, Mr. Mendis.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so talk to us. Is there a justification for the huge gap we're seeing between Sierra Leone, Gabon, and Nigeria's ticket charges in comparison to the African average, which is just $68?
Well, I think the first thing we need to look at when we're trying to understand why these taxes are so high is what exactly are the taxes being levied. And I think Nigeria is different than Sierra Leone, for example, because in Nigeria, the taxes that are charged on an air ticket are not fixed. There are 3 taxes which are usually charged for an international departure from Nigeria. One is the security charge, which is a flat 30,600 naira. So, whether you're going to Ghana, whether you're going to London or whatever, you're paying that 30,600, and that is the cost of funding the X-ray machines, the security services, and so forth. Then there is an airport service charge, which is a varied scale depending on whether you're going to an ECOWAS destination or whether you're going further afield. That varies between about 120,000 naira to about 155,000 naira. And, again, those are not the big numbers. The big number is what they call the NG tax, and that is the sales tax, and it is based upon a percentage of the actual fare that you have paid for a ticket. And this is where sometimes these numbers can get really high and appear to be an airport tax, but the reality is that it's actually a revenue tax. It is a sales tax like a VAT that is being levied on tickets for passengers who are departing from Nigeria. And I think that is around 1.1% of the ticket fare you're paying. So if you're buying a $100 ticket, you're just paying $1 in taxes. But if you're buying a $10,000 ticket, you're now paying $110 in taxes. And that's why when you start looking in terms of why Nigeria appears to be higher, it's because the way the tax structure for airline tickets when departing from Nigeria is structured, that the average tends to be higher because the average fare tends to be higher for people flying on long-haul international destinations.
Interesting. Could you tell us a bit more about, Sierra Leone and Gabon, because you're trying to say there is a difference. We need to look at Nigeria from, a different perspective from what you just explained.
Absolutely. And, Sierra Leone is somewhere that I've advocated very vocally for lower taxes, because I do believe that it is, it is depressing the demand for taxes over there. And I actually had a chance to debate this with the Director General of the Sierra Leone Civil Aviation Authority in April at a conference in London. And it was a very interesting point that she had brought up back then, is that Sierra Leone has actually gone in for private sector funding of their aviation infrastructure. So they've got a brilliant new terminal in Freetown, a lot of excellent infrastructure, and I'd say even world-class infrastructure that has been developed there. But this has had to be funded by the private sector. So in order for the private sector to get a cost recovery, they're having to charge fees and, airport taxes and so forth that are at the level needed for them to make a return on their investment. It's not something that a government is, a government often is able to use general tax revenue to fund this as an investment in infrastructure and so forth. But in places like Sierra Leone, we've actually seen this being because of a private sector investment in there and the need for the private sector to independently recover the capital investment that they've made into developing these new terminals and into the infrastructure that is basically required in order to to host international flights today.
Well, Mr. Mendis, I would like you to hold your thoughts. When we come back, we will continue. We'll go on a very short commercial break. Stay with us. Sean Mendis is right here with me. And of course, thank you for staying with us. Thank you for staying with me, Sean Mendis.
Thank you.
All right. I mean, you said a lot, but then on the one hand, we have airline operators in Nigeria saying that about 30 to 40 or even 50% of airfares are based on, or actually, caused by the taxes, levies, and charges and all of that. So my question now is, how much of the high ticket cost is directly tied to whether structural issues like forex challenges, fuel cost, operational cost versus, just being arbitrarily high levies, fees, and taxes?
That's a very good question. And once again, you need to dive into what exactly you're comparing over here. So, we've addressed what the passenger taxes are. So these are the taxes that a passenger pays on every ticket. But on top of that, there are the fees that the airline or the operator of the aircraft themselves are paying for the right to operate. So this will include, fees to FANT, the Federal Airports Authority of Nigeria, as landing fees for for the privilege to land at that airport. Then they'll be paying to handling agents, whether that is NACO or SACOL or whatever, to basically load and unload the aircraft and do the check-in and so forth. They will be paying to the Nigerian Airspace Management Agency, to NAMA, for the right to fly through Nigerian airspace. So all of these charges are in addition to the ones that are directly being charged to the passenger in terms of the passenger taxes, and these charges are now being paid by the airlines. Now, those charges then have to be built into what the airline creates as their fares. So while, if you're paying, say, $100 totally, $30 may be taxes which go directly to government, but the remaining $70 includes, which is the airline's cut, includes fees that the airline has to pay to government and to government agencies, in addition to the ones that the passenger is paying. So certainly, as far as that goes, a lot of African countries, and Nigeria is an interesting one in this respect, because given the amount of volume of air traffic that exists in Nigeria, the fees are indeed significantly higher. I mean, you can understand small countries like Sierra Leone or Malawi or things as such, where these fees are necessarily high because the airport, which costs the same to maintain, is only seeing maybe 5, 6, 7 flights a day. But when you're looking at airports like Lagos and Abuja, which have literally 100+ flights a day, these are a lot harder to justify in those cases. So I think airlines are very much justified in saying that the levies that the various agencies and operators and concession holders are levying on them is a big chunk of what constitutes the ticket price that a passenger winds up paying in Nigeria.
So that sort of makes it difficult for us to have this conversation around reducing it, doesn't it? And apart from that, I also want us to look at something. I mean, I don't think this supports, travel, regional trade, or even, it doesn't even make Nigeria or any country, competitive. What do you think about this?
I completely agree. I think that the reality is a government's role is probably should be to invest in the infrastructure, or to at least create an enabling environment for infrastructure to be improved. And when that infrastructure is improved, you will get better competition, you will get more entrants in the market, and that automatically will wind up driving costs down, as well as creating enough volume that the cost recovery on a user cost basis will improve. However, it's often politically difficult for governments to make that choice, especially when it comes to something like aviation in developing countries, because right now aviation is something that only the top few percentage of the population actually have access to. And when you are out searching for votes, it's difficult to say that I'm going to spend this $1 billion on building a new airport, when you could be spending that $1 billion on roads and schools and hospitals and so forth. So it's a conflict of priorities for politicians in this respect, and unfortunately African politicians do not have a strong track record of taking wise long-term decisions that are often in the benefit of their countries.
That's quite interesting. I mean, that's a hard one, a tough one to chew, if you ask me. But it's interesting because, I mean, it doesn't look far from the truth, Now, let's look at this. Of the 54 African countries that were actually studied, I mean, 14 charged passengers over $100 in taxes and fees. And when we look at 2022, there were just 13 countries. Now there are 14. First, I see this as a sign of worsening conditions for airlines and travelers. And secondly, it sort of brings other issues like non-adherence to ICAO, that's International Civil Aviation Organization policies, fragmented tax regimes, and over-reliance on aviation as a source of government revenue. I mean, you've talked about these other things, but is it really ever going to change, especially the last part, over-relying on aviation as a source of government revenue, forgetting that this also has the potential to transform trade?
Absolutely. And, it's a vicious circle, because when you start saying that, aviation is for the elite and therefore we must tax it more, you wind up pricing aviation so that only the elite can afford it. And therefore your aviation sector no longer grows. And this is something, it's not unique to Africa. I think Africa sees it more because a vast majority of African countries are in the lower middle income and developing country range. But you tend to see this in a lot of developing countries. I mean, we're seeing a similar debate in India, for example, where a lot of airports are increasing their airport user fees, or basically, the passenger taxes that a passenger pays on this. And again, they're justifying it on the basis that, but we're developing such wonderful infrastructure. But at the same time, when you're adding, $10, $12 to every single ticket that are out there, you wind up potentially pricing people out of these markets. And this is just one of many, obstacles that we face in Africa. I mean, if you look in terms of the fact that we're discussing Africa as a whole, yet Africa is actually fragmented into 50 plus different jurisdictions. And many of these jurisdictions have artificial barriers like visas and tariffs and things like this, which further constrain this beyond just the cost. I mean, for example, if a Nigerian wanted to go to Botswana or Lesotho or something, just for tourism right now, just simply getting a visa for some of these places is going to take them months and cost them hundreds of dollars. And, once again, this is what winds up depressing the demand for intra-African travel, for intra-African trade, and for intra-African connectivity.
Interestingly, Sean Mendis, we'll have to end this conversation here, but thank you so much for the thoughts you have shared so far. I mean, we need to keep that conversation going around trade and connectivity. Thank you so much one more time for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.